If you've watched my videos, you know that I have a keen interest in geotheology, which, to put it succinctly, includes the study of places and spaces of the earth connected to the study or worship of the divine. Geography, of course, asks where and why questions, and as a geographer, I'm certainly not the first person to ask where the Garden of Eden was located. In fact, if you do a search for the Garden of Eden on Google, you'll get hundreds of hits. Many of those hits are about the location of that ancient, seemingly small place. Now, I've not viewed or read all the sources that claim to know where the location of the Garden of Eden was. Now, the sources that I have reviewed offer some interesting and even peculiar notions about a place that most researchers seem to think is not very big. So I thought it would be interesting to put on our geographer's hat and go in search of Eden. I hope you'll join me. In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the God of Abraham is the creator of the heavens and the earth. While secular scholars scoff at any alleged accuracy of biblical passages with respect to scientific knowledge of the earth's past and its cosmology, the Genesis account of the progression of creation nevertheless parallels what scientists understand about the introduction, establishment, and succession of inanimate materials and life forms that they call biomes. Although religionists and scientists differ on the timeline of those events, as well as the catalyst behind the forces that caused their successions, the Genesis account very generally follows what ecologists know about the establishment of ecosystems on the planet, including the late arrival of we humans. We are in both scientific and biblical terms early newcomers. Unfortunately, the story of creation in Genesis 1:1 is one of only a few themes in which all three religions can agree. Somehow the word garden has taken on a connotation of a place with an especially restricted size. We think of a garden as a small piece of ground in which people plant and harvest fruits, herbs, flowers, and vegetables. In Great Britain, a garden can refer to one's grassy backyard, while in England and Scotland, which is part of Great Britain, a yard is where you park your car. Biblical and scientific evidence suggests that the Garden of Eden was much larger than the way we understand a garden. Think ecosystem, or even more precisely, a biome. The Bible, natural science, and paleoanthropology offer us clues which, when we put them together, show us the location of the Garden of Eden. For instance, in the Bible, the only recognizable locations or names for the rivers or land places or landmarks associated with Eden are Ethiopia or Cush and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. As found in Genesis 2:10 through 14, water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into four heads. The name of the first was Pison. That is it which compasseth the whole land of Havilah. Where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good, there is bdellium and the onyx stone, and the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river was Hiddekel, or the Tigris. That is it which goeth toward the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Euphrates. Now, the watershed in Ethiopia mostly drains into the Rift Valley lakes. According to Spencer Wells, the noted geneticist working in paleoanthropology who has headed up National Geographic's Genome 2 project for years, he notes that the mitochondrial Y chromosome DNA origins of modern humans is in that well-watered place. Given the size of the planet and absent any supernatural explanation, humans in the time of Moses, the most likely author of the book of Genesis, would have had to retain some tradition or cultural memory passed from generation to generation that their roots were in Ethiopia. However, many biblical scholars use the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates as their guide to locate the Genesis garden. Consequently, they often place it in either southeastern Turkey or northwestern Iraq. Still, others claim that the garden is now under the Persian Gulf. The Genesis account of the geographic location for the Garden of Eden, it could be argued, is simply describing the parameters of the original ecumene for our ancestors, which stretched from Ethiopia through Mesopotamia, which of course is now Iraq. Folks, if we apply a little science to our faith lives, especially based on the Bible, we find that they most often agree with each other. Remember, the people who wrote the ancient texts were not schooled in the words of sciences. They spoke and wrote in tongues that the average literate person of their times would have understood. For just a minute, as we close today, look at these maps again. Here's a map of the Tigris and the Euphrates, which drain today's Iraq. Now, take a look at the location of ancient Kush, today's Ethiopia. These are the only places mentioned in the Genesis account of creation that we can recognize today. Now, let's tie all this together. In 1916, an Egyptologist named James Henry Breasted, his last name conjures up an image of an all-white meal at KFC if you ask me, published a book titled Ancient Times, A History of the Early World. In his book, he describes a unique grassy area that forms a half circle around a desert that he claimed no one had named. So, he seized the opportunity to name the grassy area. He called it the Fertile Crescent, and today we consider this large area to be the cradle of civilization. Take a look at this map of the Fertile Crescent and then compare it to the maps of Kush in Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Given the biblical parameters of the Genesis account of creation and what we know about the cradle of civilization, it's my contention that we are safe to argue that the Garden of Eden and the Fertile Crescent are largely the same place. Climate change since the rise of civilization has no doubt reduced the size of the original Eden. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion and will like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing you next week here on The Vantage Point.